Let's see. I've almost at 300.
That many?
Yeah.
When did you start?
I'm like December 16th, I think.
Oh, so 10 months, huh? Oh, yeah, you have been doing it pretty much every day then, huh?
I,
Wow.
every day. When I started out, there were 1,840 days left to the end of 2024,
Uh-huh.
and that's kind of the framework I'm working within. And
Wow.
my original plan was to interview people like at Starbucks, at the stores, on the streets, and I did that from December to like the middle of March. I
Mm-hmm.
I had some work travel in like the UK, so I was like interviewing people in London and York and Edinburgh, and it's just really kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
It
Oh, I bet.
gives you an excuse to talk to people too. That
Yeah.
you know, uh, of course, depending upon how you approach them, they're like, "What are you trying to sell me?" Or like, you know, I hadn't quite mastered that yet. No, I just want to talk. Nobody just wants to talk, you know.
Right, right. Yeah, really? Just about the moon? Are you telling me moon rocks? What are you doing?
Exactly. I mean, is this candy camera? I mean, it's just like, but
That's
but it's
funny.
so good to see you after so long. I'm trying to think the last time we had any type of interaction. I want to say it was over a decade ago.
It has been a while because I want to say it was, man, was it '08 or '09 maybe? When I was still back in Houston? Because I remember we had a chance to meet up for lunch in Houston at one point. But yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a long
Yeah,
time. So it's good to see you. It's good to see you.
good to
So
see you too. And I love your LinkedIn kind of byline, "Lady Learn It All."
yeah. So I'm still in school. Even after all these years, I still, every once in a while, I'll get really interested in a particular subject. And I'm just like, you know what? I think I want to go to school for this. And so here I am again in school, working on my fifth degree at this point. And so it's a journey, and I think I'm hoping I don't get stumble across another topic where I start another degree program after I finish this one next year.
What degree is this in?
This one is actually government analytics at Johns Hopkins University. So it's a joint program that they have there, between what they're now calling their data analytics and policy program and their intelligence program. So I'm in at the end of my third year, and I still have three more courses to go. So I'm targeting completion by fall of next year. So, but yeah, I just kind of stumbled across it. Somebody at work who's another learn it all was sharing with one of our internal communities. He was just like, "Oh, look at all these other programs that are relevant to what we're doing in the technology industry," and this one just caught my eye, and I was just like, you know what, those courses sound really interesting, and the instructors, the adjunct faculty, have great background and practical real world experience, and the folks that are in the courses with me, a lot of them are learn it alls as well. They have a lot of work experience already, and they're in it because they're like, yeah, this is a great forum to just understand how to apply a lot of the theory into more practical uses for government analytics and data analytics in general, and just all the policy implications that come from that. So it's been a really interesting program. I wish I could spend more time. I would love to be able to go back to being a full-time student again, but I got to work too. So
Well,
it's great to be able to find a program that allows me to do both. So
yeah, but I think you kind of touched on something that seems to be missing with most people in the workforce. That is, you have to be a lifelong learner. I mean,
mhm.
you can never stop, and you should be exploring like tangential interests and maybe things completely unrelated. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's where it comes in.
Yeah. And sometimes you think they're unrelated, but actually a lot of the most difficult challenges that we have right now, it's because they're multidisciplinary, and you don't always it's not always easy to find people who are familiar enough with multiple disciplines and how they all come together in order to address more complex problems. So that's where, I've just always had a passion for learning a lot of different things. And of course, in the government space, you need to know a lot of different things to effectively administer all the different programs at the government. administers at state and local level and even at the federal level. So to me, a multidisciplinary approach sounds the most intuitive, and it's what you should be striving for. But yeah, a lot of people still feel like, no, you need to be a specialist in one little area and hope that there is somebody who can help connect the dots somewhere along the way. So
So what kind of policy and analytic type questions are y'all working on? I mean, what sort of area?
yeah, so a lot of it, especially with government analytics, obviously in health and human services, you have healthcare information, privacy implications around that. And then with, justice and public safety and national security issues, again, there's a privacy concern there, constitutional law implications that get into, whether you can do a reasonable search on somebody's digital information, and a lot of other aspects of that are dominant in the news right now. The reason why it's a problem, and the reason why in the tech industry, especially with the volumes of data that they have on individuals' activity, you do start to wonder who is really managing how all of this information is being used, and is it consistent with the policies we already have in place, or do we need to develop new policy in order to make sure that it's not misused and abused by the companies that are collecting the information? So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things at the convergence of the technology, law, and just government administration and policy in general. And so it's a fascinating area to be in, for somebody who started out as an engineering geeky kind of person, and then I went to law school, and then I went to seminary in the middle of all of this too, because sometimes when you're looking for a moral framework for how to address some of those topics, you start to get into where are you establishing the moral guidance that drives some of those decisions, and how much of it is based in a religious perspective on things versus non-religious ways of establishing the moral guidance that you need to make those decisions. So it's an interesting area to be in.
It is very complex. It touches on so much I would love to talk to you about. Um, I mean, like, well, one thing that's front and center this year is, to what extent should government try to protect citizens from threats that aren't completely understood and quantified?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if uh, I mean, at the beginning of this sort of pandemic lockdown type thing back in March, I think what really drove sort of the lockdown efforts was the images coming out of northern Italy with
Mm-hmm.
like all these, and everybody was scared. It's like, wow, we're going to have bodies lining up in the street and what have you. And it made sense in that context to kind of shut everything down and what have you. But then it's sort of like we've renegotiated and said, well, it doesn't have to be that bad. If anybody is at risk, we need to go and still lock everything down. And the question becomes, um, like, at what point does it, I mean, how many people need to be at risk in order to justify certain actions? I mean, obviously, people die every day on the freeways because of, DUIs, but at the same token, and that's recognized as a very severe problem, but we're not having like police outside of every single bar uh, locking it
Mm-hmm.
down because that person might actually run into somebody. It's kind of more random or what have you. I mean, at what point do
Mm-hmm.
we put the breathalyzer actually in the car, and part of starting the engine is doing the breathalyzer check? I mean, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, and that's a tough topic. I mean, because I grew up in Florida, and I'm actually back in Florida, where we have a large portion of the population is retired and elderly, and even when we have bad flu seasons here in the state, they lock down a lot of the elder care facilities and stuff because they know they're more vulnerable to just a bad flu season. And every year we lose I mean, it's unfortunate reality. People die from disease strains related to the flu. Coronavirus is obviously a distant relative of that, family of viruses, and the impact of that is much more severe, and it appeared to be much more random. And so when we didn't know what we didn't know earlier in the year, we weren't sure what the actual impact was going to be across the general population. So, I thought taking the short-term measures until they could gather more information made sense, but to extend it an unreasonably long period of time when the number of folks impacted by it may not, it may not make sense. That's an unfortunate, it's a tough decision that has to be made on a regular basis by folks in the health and human services sphere. Medical ethicists and other folks in there are constantly having to evaluate at what point do we need to restrict the general population's activities because of the health impacts on a more vulnerable subset of that population. And there are no easy answers to that. I mean, and that's what I think is what's frustrating to a lot of people around it. They just want to be able to go to a medical expert. And I admire Dr. Fauci immensely and everybody else in the task force related to that. They want to be able to go to an expert like that and just get a clear cut answer and just say, what do we need to do? But it's constant trade-offs, just like a lot of other legal questions and other ethical issues that come up. It's a balance of risks and also taking into consideration, and even in Florida, Governor DeSantis brought this up, even after hurricanes, um, if people are told to stay indoors for an extended period of time, there are a lot of negative consequences that come from that. And they still have to balance, well, what is, if we allow everybody to go out and try to pursue their normal, everyday activities, how many of them are likely to encounter negative situations or even put their lives at risk because the condition on the ground, especially after a major hurricane, is still life-threatening in some cases, but it's randomly around the state. And yeah, I wish there were an easy way to say that, yeah, you could look up in this table exactly what you need to do under these circumstances, but everybody's got to make their own decisions. And that's where it's been interesting to see across different states and different localities how they've determined what's best for their population that they're responsible for and what trade-offs they're willing to make. Because I can tell you, where I am in Hillsborough County, the mayor of Tampa had a very different perspective on what was appropriate for the citizens within the city limits versus what the sheriff and the county leadership thought was appropriate for everybody within the county. And to see how they were, reconciling the best approach for that was interesting. But I have to say, you have to keep it all in perspective. And just like the example you brought up too, with the number of deaths that people encounter just driving out on the roadways, obviously as a society we've accepted that there are going to be a certain number of people dying on the roads on a regular basis, but we're allowing that to happen under the current circumstances because we don't want to impede all the other productivity and things that we can accomplish by allowing people to be on the roadways in that manner. So they're tough decisions, and I know it's easy to be a backseat driver, or to criticize the people that are making the decisions, because the ideal situation is that you would have no deaths under any circumstances, but that's not realistic, and that's not how those decisions are being made. So that's life.
Yeah, exactly. It seems so fuzzy, because like even amusement park rides, you have deaths from time to time there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, how do you balance like the needs for amusement versus the potential of death, I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. I
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that sort of kind of bugs me in retrospect about the whole universal closing of businesses is that it's really easy to enforce. It's really easy to communicate. It's really easy to see if it's happening or not. But at the same token, it doesn't leave any option other than for these businesses to be in a bad spot. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you could almost imagine, an extreme case, uh, having like a haircut cutting salon where you have like rooms with only one client in them that's completely isolated from every other one, and
Mm-hmm.
like the technician is in like a suit of some type that's completely, they're completely isolated from. It just
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a helmet, really,
Right.
where they're completely isolated from the client, and it's kind of unrealistic to think that this would be done on any sort of scale, but uh, you know it would achieve the end result, right, of trying to prevent human to human transmission, and would allow for those businesses that were able to do such thing to continue operating. And but
Mm-hmm.
whenever you're like, well, if you're a haircutting salon, you must close without the option of at least evaluating alternatives. I mean, it
Yeah.
just seems like we kind of box ourselves in a corner
Mm-hmm.
to some degree unnecessarily. And I was wondering
Yeah.
what you thought.
Yeah, and that's been the challenge, of course, when people react to what seem like unnecessarily overprotective measures. Because in an ideal situation, of course, you would have perfect unlimited access to a lot of resources, even the personal protective equipment. There were obviously shortages that were happening. Some of that has been alleviated since the start of the pandemic. But, a lot of people in some areas are willing to accept the risk. And even if you go back to your amusement park ride, I mean, some of these roller coasters, they've got a lengthy board, right when you're getting in the boarding area, there's a long list of all these health conditions that might lead to a bad outcome. But it's still up to the rider to decide. I'm going to go ahead and take my chances. And that's where I think, a lot of the pushback was coming from the general population. As the more information that we got, the more statistics that we got, and the disparity in the impact in different geographic areas too, because obviously more congested areas were likely to encounter um, more acute levels of the negative impacts than maybe in less populated areas, where people could still pretty much go about their normal business as long as they're wearing masks and keeping their distance from each other. So, and that's where the one size fits all approach never works out well, because there are a lot of other variables that generally aren't taken into consideration when you try to do one size fits all. And, I'm of the opinion, most government decisions should be made locally first, and then when it makes sense, it should move up to the higher levels. So, and I think because the local leadership knows what's best for their communities, and they know, whether their community is willing to accept certain risks, and whether they really are prepared to deal with the fallout on their own, or if they are going to have to reach out for help from higher levels of government. So, yeah, I can't say that I'm a big proponent of the one size fits all um, approach to some of those decisions that have been made, because again, you have to look at the economic impact of what's happened there and take into consideration, like I mentioned earlier, even during bad flu seasons, or even if you're looking at, interstate commerce and the highways and roadways and all of this kind of stuff. Our government leaders have historically had to make those types of decisions where you trade off what's best for the general population with what the impact might be for the more vulnerable parts of the population. And it's an unfortunate and tough position to be in, to have to say that we're willing to tolerate some losses in order to ensure that that most of the population is still able to try to maintain what would be considered normal lifestyle and normal activities during the course of the day. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality, and that's where a lot of government policy and understanding data analytics and what the data is telling you, what the data is not telling you, is just as important. And actually, on my Facebook timeline, I got a reminder about like a quote that I put on my Facebook page like 10 years ago, where it's just like, not only do you need to look at what the statistics are telling you, but you also need to consider what they're not telling you, and don't assume that the numbers are the be all end all of your decision making process. There's a lot of interpretation that needs to happen, and that still requires strong leadership to make those decisions.
It reminds me of that cartoon where it's night and this guy's looking underneath a lamp, and this person comes up to him and says, "I thought you lost your keys over there," and he's like, "Well, the light's better here."
Right, right.
Yeah. Sometimes that's true of data. You have really good data, but it's misleading the problems in the part that it
Hmm.
doesn't have. So,
Exactly.
um, well, and another thing is, like these businesses that were forced to shut down, most of them don't own their facilities, and even if they did, they would still owe like property taxes and maintenance and things like that. Usually, have a landlord involved, and they are technically, I mean, they contractually obligated, for their rent. Um,
Hmm.
so in a case like this, it seems like it's an unfair burden placed on the renter. They're still held accountable for paying, and they can't get the revenue. But it was really kind of like the population acting through their government that shut down their business. I mean, is there anything that allows for that business owner to get relief because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend folks speak to, counsel about the legal remedies that they have under those circumstances. I mean, sometimes if you want to say it's something within a force majeure clause or something else, even if somebody wanted to interpret it as another act of God. I mean, we have that obviously in the Gulf Coast areas when hurricanes come through. It's an act of God, and you can't expect people to perform under some agreement when the circumstances make it just impossible. And sometimes it is an impossibility clause. I'm unable to actually conduct business that justified my reason for leasing this space in the first place. So, but of course, the laws vary by jurisdiction. And so that's where it would make sense to speak with someone who can actually evaluate the actual circumstances that they're in, to look at that. But yeah, I would definitely consider those options when looking for remedies around that. And that's another reason why too, when the government was trying to provide relief in a lot of areas, they knew the financial burden on a lot of people was unexpected, and not everybody has a 6 to 12 month reserve of funds to cover interruptions in activity that are this prolonged. I mean, we're talking about more than 6 months now in a lot of cases where normal commercial activity has been significantly disrupted. And to assume that everybody is in a position to absorb that kind of uncertainty for such an extended period of time is just not realistic for most of the people who've been impacted. And that's part of the trade-off that we have to make is, whether the exposure to certain vulnerable populations in our society, whether that is still sufficient to, acknowledge to deal with the outcome of these economic impacts to a lot of other people, which also do lead to negative health outcomes for that impacted population as well. And that's something that I know one of the earlier studies that I had looked at in the some of the HHS related work is the opioid impacts. And, in parts of the country where there were significant declines in economic health and opportunities in certain areas, that led to a lot of negative health outcomes for the impacted populations. And so to suggest that the health and well-being is totally separate from economic well-being is to ignore a significant relationship there between financial stress on individuals and families and communities, and how that does translate to negative health outcomes as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't affect all of us the same. I mean, I was working on at home before this whole thing happened. That's kind of one reason why I created this project, was so it would force me to actually go interact with an actual human being at least once a day in person.
Mhm.
That didn't quite work out since March, but that's a different story, or maybe the same story. But like my wife works from home, my children are going to school at home, and in many respects, our life is able to continue at the same level as it was before.
Mhm.
But for those people that have to physically go someplace to work, who don't have connectivity at home, who um, maybe aren't used to operating with technology, I mean, their life is completely different than mine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the broadband connectivity is really significant, because the people who are actually able to shift from in-office work to virtual office work, it was a little bit bumpy, back in the March, April timeframe, but I think by May or June, the folks who already had the infrastructure and the tools available for them to make that transition, they were already like, okay, we're shifting over. We're going to be doing everything virtually now. But for a lot of folks in the service sectors and other hospitality, I mean, to see the impact that happened with Marriott, to see Vegas shut down and all of the workers that depend on those resorts to be open for them to actually have something to do, and some employment activity there for them, they can't transition to just virtual work.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a huge cost to our economic health. And it did translate to negative physical health and mental health outcomes for a lot of those people who 3 to 6 months into this have still not been able to return back to normal levels of income and activity that they had they'd planned their entire lives around. So to empathize with where they are, based on that position, I think is also one of the reasons why in some parts of the country the government leaders have been more willing to open up, go ahead and do the soft opens a little bit sooner, check and see what the outcome really is, whether they're willing to accept that trade-off in order to ensure the overall well-being of their society. Which again, is the same calculus that goes into making other similar decisions before, even with a bad flu season or any other public health emergency. And a lot of things to consider, a lot of things.
Now, I'm not sure what your schedule looks like today, but I gotta imagine you're a very busy person. Uh, do you have some more time, or do you have to go?
Sure, we can talk for a few more minutes.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the moon and space and the future of humanity.
That's
For
what this was for, right?
Yes, but
Yeah.
did you know that we were planning to send people back to the moon in 2024?
I thought we were going to try to do it again, but I didn't realize we had a date on the schedule yet until you mentioned it to me. And I was like, oh, okay, good. So now we've got a countdown date to work towards. So yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, I think it was like February of 2019. There was a National Space Council meeting with like the vice president and a bunch of the cabinet and what have you, where they announced that they wanted to put people on the moon, the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024. And then in November, they NASA appointed a associate administrator that had a little lapel pin that was counting down to the end of 2024.
Nice.
And he was highlighting a NASA employee, which that was the inspiration for this project. It's like, what about the everyday people? Let me find out what they think.
Hmm.
But what do you think about that? Us going back to the moon?
I think it's a great goal because it harkens back to when we were in the space race back in the was it the 60s or so, and we're trying to show our superiority from a scientific perspective, and just the the fact that we're still investing in this area, I think, is important, and not only because of the scientific research, that can be accomplished there, but also because of the commercial value and things that we learn from these, this type of exploration, and other ways that we can all benefit as a society from the learnings that we get from these activities. So, I mean, I'm a space junkie. Well, I can't say I'm a space junkie anymore. I haven't been able to spend as much time on it as I used to. But growing up in Florida, of course, even on the Gulf Coast, I remember when we had night launches before of the shuttle, you could see them from the Gulf side at night. And I was traveling over to see some of the launches there before the shuttle program ended a few years back. But yeah, to be able to go back to the moon, I think is awesome. To have people on Mars is even, that's a cool goal to work towards too. And I'm just excited to see what we can learn from it, and hopefully see more international cooperation, just like we have with the space stations as well, to show that the entire world does benefit from our leadership in this area, and everything else that we can learn and share with the entire world, not just within our own society here. So yeah, I'm excited about it. It'll be great to see all the progress that they make working towards successful launch and landing.
Um, what do you think the future of humanity looks like? Do you think eventually we'll actually start having people that were born off of Earth that have never been to Earth, or do you think we're going to be forever tied to the Earth, everybody, all humans, and just making like these little bitty short trips to places? How do you see it?
Um, well, I don't think anybody needs to be planet bound to be born. I think the circumstances were probably closer than we think to having somebody actually being conceived and born off planet. So I don't think that that's a stretch of the imagination. I think we have a lot of the pieces are there for that to happen. And as we learn more about, building structures that can, sustain regular life for extended periods of time, whether it's a space station based living environment, whether it's a moon based environment, another planet based environment, I don't think we're that far away from that technology. And what you see happening with, obviously what SpaceX is doing, and the commercial opportunities for more, space related movement and activity there. Yeah, I don't think it's a stretch at all to consider that a possibility. Whether it will actually happen in our lifetimes, it would be great to see it. But I wouldn't be surprised if the next generation grows up around seeing that happen pretty regularly.
Now, since you've studied theology, I wanted to run this past you and find out, the end of the world is a very key feature of Christianity.
Hmm.
And there's some people who may argue, what's the point of going out into space if the world's going to end? Shouldn't
Hmm.
we be focusing our attention on converting everybody and that type of thing? And I was just wondering how how that fits into sort of your thoughts about the future.
I think it depends on what you consider to constitute the world. Because, in a lot of religious teachings, I mean, it's not just limited to what's on the planet, it's limited to the entire environment, and everything that we see in space, everything that's out in the galaxy, too. So to assume that we're only limited to life on earth, and that the end of the world, whatever your eschatological interpretation is of how the world is going to end, to assume that that's limited to just this planet, I think might read a bit more into different religious teachings than they're actually ascribing to that. So, but yeah, if there's anything that I learned from studying theology, is that there are a lot of different interpretations to religious teachings. um, and you'd have to really have a limited view of what they're trying to say as it relates to space exploration and the potential for life to continue on beyond this planet. So Yeah, that would be another good conversation to have, to see how the different world religions actually interpret the applicability of their teachings beyond this planet.
Oh, and I mean, on the other side, maybe there's some support for saying that we're sort of compelled to go and push ourselves to go as far as we can. There's that parable that Jesus told about the landlord or the rich person that went on a long trip, and he got three of his servants together and gave each of them different sums of money.
Hmm.
Two of them doubled their money, and the other one was so afraid of losing it, he buried it, and
Hmm.
he ended up being, you know, he got an unsatisfactory performance rating for that.
Right.
And so I think, if you expand that out to humanity, we've been given the capability of kind of pushing ourselves beyond the earth. Because we have that capability, does that kind of mean that we're compelled to make the most of it?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's you know personally for me, I think that type of exploration and understanding all of creation is part of our charter. It falls within our sphere to not only to steward everything that we have on this planet, but also to be good stewards of everything else that we've inherited in the overall environment that we're aware of, and not to assume that only what we can perceive now is all that there is to perceive. The more that we learn, the more that we explore, the more technology advances, and the more that we're able to learn and understand about what's happening in the greater galaxy, I think allows us to better deliver on our, you know, if people want to look at it as your God-given, duty to evangelize across everywhere you can access, then definitely the scope is significantly larger than maybe in previous generations they were even aware that they could reach into. So, yeah, I'm definitely not the type to say that we're limited by only what we know now, but to always, maintain the perspective that what we are able to learn and see, and eventually, it's just like there are different ways of being able to see different depths of perception that people are able to have, and to recognize that there are things that we haven't seen yet that are out there for us to work on in the future when we're ready as humans to address that. I think you still need to be receptive to the possibility that that could happen in the future as well. And then there are still some eternal truths that are still applicable no matter what the circumstances are, but you still have to be able to be humble enough to acknowledge that you may not see everything there is to see right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any interest in you personally going to space?
um I think it would depend on, the advancements in the technology, the risks that would be associated with it. It would be an interesting ride. But I can't say that I've signed up to actually, be one of the first passengers on a SpaceX commercial flight or anything like that. That's not like a priority for me right now. But it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because I'm sure a lot of people early on in the airline industry too, they were just like, yeah, I don't think I want to be one of the first people on those planes. But after you see them fly around a few times and everything, and it becomes more reliable and more safe and everything, then you're like, yeah, I can go for a trip, see how it is, just for fun.
Do you have any idea on what your number might be of safe trips before you feel comfortable? Is it like in the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or even higher?
Um, oh, I don't know. I don't know that I would have a definite figure on that right now. Uh, but I mean, I'm sure at some point we'll reach the point where, just like with air travel, it just seems so routine that you're like, oh yeah, what could go wrong? I mean, we've had so many successful flights. I'm willing to take the chance. Um, yeah, I don't know that I would come up with a definite number though to say, okay, now we're green to go. I don't have that number in mind right now.
That makes sense. Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Um, wow, we covered a lot more than what I expected to cover. No, I mean, it's just great to hear about the progress that you're making with your countdown. I mean, because how many days away are we right now? Which
We're
episode is
like
this?
1,540 something.
1,540. Yeah, I would just like to keep watching the work that you're doing and just see how all of the rest of your interviews are lining up, and hopefully we'll be able to see, what the because do we know what the equipment is that they're going to use? Like, what vehicles are they going to use to actually get to the moon?
A little bit. So they've been in terms like a big rocket and a capsule to take the astronauts to around the moon. They've been working on the space launch system and the Orion capsule. It was supposed to have its inaugural flight several years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but right now they're on target, I think, for fall of next year, which would be an uncrewed flight. And then in 2023, they'll have some astronauts go around the moon, just like with the Apollo 8 type of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then in 2024, they'll have that same system, go uh, around the moon and then dock with a commercially built um, human landing system that will actually take them to the surface and then back up to dock with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that human landing system, there's actually three different teams that currently have contracts with NASA to put together prototypes and tests, and they'll down select from that based upon the outcomes. You have the national team, which is led by Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's company.
Okay.
And then you have Dianetics, which has their own lander, and then you have SpaceX that has a lander competing on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's interesting. That's what I think is going to be fun to see. And if we're all going to get to like do like, a space fan vote on which vehicle we would like to see. For the folks who don't have the expertise to really determine which one is the best, I'd still like to submit a vote on that. Are they going to do any kind of popular review of all the different options before they make a decision on that?
I I doubt it. I think the number one criteria for them is probably astronaut safety
Mm-hmm.
and being able to get it done in a certain time. But that's kind of an interesting idea. Which lander do you like? It's like vote for your favorite lander.
Well, because I'm just thinking of, down the road commercial possibilities here. If everybody says, if SpaceX comes up with something like the Cybertruck, I don't know that I'm going to want to vote for that one like I would maybe for what Bezos and the rest of the teams are going to throw out there. So just looking at the commercial options that would happen after the scientific and research oriented activity is addressed. So it'll be fun to watch.
But you kind of touch on this may be a solution to one of the problems that has kind of come out front and center. The vast majority of non-space people do not know we're going to the moon in 2024. It's kind of like below their level. But if these companies um, needed the general population to vote on one of their solutions, that would definitely motivate them to go and do a lot of public outreach.
Yep, it would. Just like anything else that they're trying to market. I mean, the reason why, at least a couple of those that you mentioned, the reason why their leaders are even able to invest in that now is because of all the commercial success that they've had with other ventures that they've been in before. So I think the more involved that they can get, the general population, the more interested they can get in understanding that and maybe even incorporating that in some of what they're offering. Of course, I'm thinking of Tesla and everything else that they're doing with their products there. If there are lessons that they're learning from what they're doing with SpaceX and they're able to, incorporate that back into what we're using for vehicles here on Earth, I think that would be just a great marketing thing, right? It's
Oh,
just,
exactly.
yeah. So, and I mean, I know we already incorporate a lot of technology that was developed and, studied and researched because of what we're doing in space exploration, and it gradually gets incorporated into our mainstream commerce. But yeah, and that's again where I think the previous debate before, when they were funding NASA versus allowing commercial entities to pursue a lot of these projects is sometimes, it's just like with aerospace. There's a lot of military applications that our aerospace companies are helping to research and develop and help to move forward. But they're also incorporating that into what they're doing for commercial air flight as well. So getting that public-private partnership and seeing where, yes, we can commercialize some of this, but then we still want to remain true to what we're doing from a scientific research and development perspective. It's great to see how they're able to leverage the resources they have available based on where they're coming from in the public and private spheres as well. So, yeah.
There's another really good related example of that. Have you heard of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, so NASA has these experiments they want to put on the moon and rovers they want to put on the moon and things like that. Used to, what they would do is go and design what they want, get a contractor to go off and build the rocket, build the lander, whatever they want. They decided to take a different approach a few years back and say, okay, we want to treat it more like a package delivery service. So we have these experiments we want to put on certain place in the moon. We'll go and find some companies that are willing to deliver it for us. We'll certify them and have them bid, on 2 contracts per year to do that. And so NASA started this program a few years ago. They have several companies under contract right now. They have a pool of 14 companies that are authorized to bid on these proposals. But next summer, a Houston-based company, Intuitive Machines, and a Pittsburgh-based company, Astrobotic, are landing probes on the moon as part of this program. And the terms of the program with regards to NASA is you just have to deliver our thing. You're responsible for everything. And everything else you're completely free to do. So there's additional capacity on that lander. You could do whatever you want to with it. Go deliver university payloads, commercial payloads for other companies, what have you. Astrobotic is doing this special promotion with DHL, the package delivery firm, where you could buy a little moon box, different sizes. The very smallest one's like $450 or something. It's enough to deliver like a micro SD card, which I've bought, and I'm planning to take the videos, these interviews that I've done up until the mid part of November, put them on this micro SD card, and it actually be on that lander. So your video will be going to the moon next
Cool.
summer.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're gonna have to tell me which flight it is.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I have a mailing list. If you don't mind, I can add you to it, and
yeah,
then I can make sure you know.
awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize they were already doing that. I mean, I thought that was going to be further down the road, but wow, they're already taking reservations and scheduling flights to deliver packages. Man, that's just awesome.
It really is. Yeah. Well,
Cool.
thank you so much for your time, and I think we should talk before the next 10 years.
Yeah, we shouldn't wait this long between check-ins. But yeah, keep me posted on how things are going and reach out to me. You know where to find me.
Absolutely. Well,
All
have a
right.
good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Nathan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.